Sometimes history doesn't stay quiet. Sometimes a single event is told so many times that it stops being just history and becomes a legend. The Battle of Thermopylae is one of those stories. But here is the real question. Who created this legend? History itself? Storytellers? Or did we simply choose the version we wanted to believe? We've all heard the line, 300 Spartans stopped the world. But did they really? Were there truly only 300 of them? Or was that number chosen simply because it's unforgettable? Were they fearless heroes? Or men who simply had no time left to be afraid? Was Xerxes' army really countless? Or were the numbers exaggerated so the battle would look like a miracle? And who was Leonidas? A hero? A fanatic warrior? Or a king who had to be sacrificed for politics? What was the Spartans' real choice? To win or to lose, and still write history? And another question, why did they fight? For land? For glory? Or for one simple sentence, we do not bow? For thousands of years, this battle has been retold, turned into films, written on walls, shouted as a slogan. But why this battle? Why not any of the many others? Why did a battle that ended in defeat become one of the most famous in the world? Maybe because history doesn't always remember the victors, it remembers those who stood until the end. But one question still remains. Where does the legend end? And where does the truth begin? The answer lies in the rest of the video. 480 BC, the Persian Empire had already crossed Anatolia. Cities were surrendering one after another, some out of fear, others simply choosing the side of power. Xerxes had a clear goal, to crush the entire Greek world with a single decisive campaign. But the Greeks had a problem. They were not one united country. Each city was its own state with its own army, laws, pride, and rivalries. Some chose to side with Persia. Others said, "We will fight." At the heart of that decision stood one city, Sparta. King Leonidas knew something very simple. Meeting the Persian army in an open field would be suicide. Their numbers were enormous, their cavalry strong, their archers countless. So another question appeared. Where can a small army stop a massive one? The answer on the map was just a thin line. The pass of Thermopylae. Thermopylae is a narrow mountain pass. On one side, steep rocks. On the other, the sea. In the middle, a strip of land barely wide enough for a few men to stand shoulder to shoulder. This meant the Persian army could not use its full strength. Vast numbers would be trapped in a bottleneck. The advantage of numbers would shrink to almost nothing. Leonidas' plan was simple yet brilliant. Don't choose the battlefield, choose the gateway. He turned geography into a weapon. But Thermopylae had another meaning. Its name was no accident. It means the hot gates. If these gates opened, the Persian army would pour straight into the heart of Greece, toward Athens. That is why Thermopylae was not just a location. It was a borderline. If it fell, cities would burn, culture would collapse, the future of the Greek world would change forever. Leonidas knew this. He also knew he could not defeat Persia, but he could delay Persia for a day, for 3 days, for as long as humanly possible. Because at the same time, something else was happening. The Greek fleet was preparing at Salamis to face the Persian navy. So Leonidas' mission was not only a battle, it was time itself. Thermopylae was the narrow gate that could hold back an empire. Winning there was not necessary, not retreating was, and they did not retreat. We all hear the same sentence. Only 300 Spartans fought at Thermopylae. It is simple, powerful, and easy to remember. But history shows that the truth is more complex. First, those 300 men were not random soldiers. They were the personal elite guard of King Leonidas, the most disciplined, most experienced warriors in Sparta. There were conditions for being among the 300. They had to be veteran fighters, they had to be perfectly trained and obedient, and most surprisingly, they had to have a son. The reason was clear. Sparta knew they might not return, and the Spartan bloodline had to continue. So the 300 Spartans were, in reality, men who accepted death before they even left. But this still does not change one fact. There were not only 300 men at Thermopylae. Alongside the Spartans fought 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, 1,000 Phocians, and thousands of other Greeks from different city-states. In total, about 5,000 to 7,000 Greek soldiers were at Thermopylae. So why do we remember only the 300? The answer lies in the last day of the battle. When the Persians found the mountain path and surrounded the Greeks from behind, Leonidas understood that the outcome had changed. He ordered most of the army to withdraw, but he and the chosen men stayed. Who remained with him? The 300 Spartans, the Thespians, who chose to stay. They knew this decision meant death, but retreat did not fit the Spartan way of life. That is why the final image was burned into history. A small group of warriors, trapped, surrounded, and Leonidas refusing to step back. And that is where the legend was born. Historians agree. Yes, the number 300 became symbolic. Yes, thousands of other Greeks were overshadowed, but the 300 Spartans standing to the very end became a powerful symbol. That number is not just arithmetic. It became the name of an idea, not retreating. Being a Spartan was not just a citizenship. It was a way of life. Boys were taken from their families at the age of 7. From that moment on, their entire lives were shaped for war. Learning to endure hunger, learning to tolerate pain, fighting without rules, absolute obedience and discipline. They were taught only one thing: return with your shield or on it. In other words, win or die. Why did Spartans appear fearless? Because dying was not considered failure, but running away was considered shame. The battle begins. Dawn had not yet fully broken. A pale fog hung over the pass of Thermopylae. From far away, the sound of the sea could be faintly heard. The Spartans were silent. They did not shout. They did not make noise. They did not try to appear heroic. They simply checked their shields, adjusted their spears, and looked into one another's eyes. There was fear, but above the fear there was something stronger, the feeling of having already decided. In the distance, the ground began to tremble. The Persian army was approaching. The sound of armor, the rhythm of thousands of marching feet, dust rising like a dark cloud. The pass was narrow, and this enormous army had no choice but to squeeze through it. Leonidas stood in front. Behind him, Spartans, shield against shield, and beside them the other Greek warriors. They were not waiting for a miracle. They had only one purpose. No one must pass through here. The first Persian assault came like a wave. They were many, shouting, rushing forward. But the pass was narrow. Numbers no longer meant power. The Spartans formed the phalanx, shields locked together, spears thrust forward, a living wall. The first wave was stopped. Then came another, and another. After each assault, for a brief moment, there was silence. Only the sound of heavy breathing. Then the noise would rise again, and the next attack would begin. As the day went on, dust filled the air. The sun disappeared behind it. Time itself seemed to slow. The Persians began to understand. In this narrow pass, their size meant nothing. This was not only a clash of weapons, it was a test of endurance. Leonidas's men did not change their positions. Retreat did not exist in their vocabulary. Before every new attack, the same question hung in the air. Will they break this time? The answer was always the same: no. By sunset, Thermopylae was no longer just a battlefield. It had become a stage where unbroken will stood its ground. And everyone knew the battle was not over. The decisive moment had not yet come, and that moment had a name: to stand until the very end. Night slowly fell over Thermopylae. The wind moved through the narrow pass as if it too remembered what had happened there. The Spartans knew. Leonidas knew. The battle could not be won in the ordinary sense. But there are moments in history when victory and defeat change their meanings. They chose not to leave. They chose to stand. News of Thermopylae spread across Greece like a spark in dry grass. People did not just hear that a battle had been fought. They heard that a handful of men stood in front of an empire and did not step aside. And something changed. Fear began to turn into resolve. Silence turned into unity. The idea appeared: they can be stopped. Later, the great Persian army would be turned back on land and at sea. But the beginning of that change did not start with ships or armies. It started in a narrow pass where men accepted death so that others could find courage. Thermopylae did not become famous because of numbers or because of strategy alone. It became famous because of a sentence carved deeper than any spear into history. There are places we do not abandon. Centuries have passed. Empires have risen and fallen. Names have faded. But when people speak of courage, of standing when it would be easier to run, one story always returns. 300 Spartans, a narrow road between sea and rock, and the decision that echoed longer than the battle itself: do not retreat.